Thank you to everyone joining us. My name is Shayla Favor, and I serve as Columbus City Council's Housing Chair. I appreciate those who have joined us today as we collectively acknowledge and honor Inauguration Day in the United States. I couldn't think of a more timely occasion to continue the conversation we started back in October regarding the Housing for All legislative package. At our first hearing, we outlined our goals for source of income, renter's choice, and rental receipt. My mission with this legislative package is to take a hard look at the systems that have perpetrated racism and inequity within housing and work collectively towards advancing fair, affordable housing strategies for all in our community. Since our initial hearing in October, I have held several follow-up meetings and conversations with various stakeholders, including advocacy groups, landlords and property managers, nonprofit partners, elected officials, and Columbus residents. Those conversations have helped inform the updates we have made since that time. At this time, we have made the following updates to the draft ordinances. In regards to source of income, the legislation has been moved from Chapter 23, the General Offenses Discriminatory Practices section of the Columbus City Code, to Chapter 45 of the Columbus City Code, which is the city's housing code. The intention here is to establish a process within City Code that will trigger penalties for those who do not abide by the new policy. My team and I continue to work with the City Attorney's Office to outline the details of those penalties, and we will share those updates as they become available. For the renter's choice legislation, there has been additional language added to capture additional security deposit alternatives on the market, including one from which we will hear this afternoon. There has also been a 5-unit cap added to exempt smaller casual landlords from compliance with this legislation. Finally, with rental receipt legislation, there has been an exemption added for our permanent supportive housing providers. This change came about through concerns from our providers who would potentially face additional administrative costs as a result of mailing receipts to extremely low-income tenants who have limited access to the electronic options outlined in the legislation. My office continues to address additional updates and concerns with our city attorney and will provide further edits and communications in the days following this hearing. This evening, I'm grateful to have presentations from Obligo, MORPC, and CMHA. We will follow those presentations with testimony from the public. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge one of my council colleagues who have joined us this evening, Councilmember Emmanuel Remy. Councilmember Remy, would you like to make any remarks this evening?
Thank you, Councilmember Favor. We appreciate you holding this hearing again and bringing on the panel that you have lined up for us. Interested in hearing more about what this legislation is all about and how it can help those most in need in our community. And so I thank you for the work that went into this evening and look forward to a robust conversation.
Thank you, Councilmember. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I'd like to introduce Shira Dolbert with Obligo to provide comment in regards to the product, which provides another alternative to the traditional security deposit. Shira, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, council members. And thank you all council members for holding this public hearing and providing us with the opportunity to speak on the matter of security deposit alternatives. Thank you also again, Councilmember Shayla Favor, for your leadership on these important issues. These days, it is imperative that renters have options when out-of-pocket cash is sometimes hard to come by. My name is Shira Dolberg, and I lead the Business Development Department at Obligo. Our company was founded 3 years ago in New York with the mission of building trust between landlords and renters through financial technology. Our core product is a credit-based alternative to a security deposit. We operate in 24 states, including Ohio, and our model is one of the only 2 models that exist in the market today. Obligo took inspiration from the hotel security deposit practice. When you check into a hotel, you're not required to provide a cash deposit. Instead, you simply pre-authorize the hotel to charge your credit card up to an agreed upon amount should you cause any damage or just drink a beverage from the minibar and forget to pay. If the hotel makes a charge, the credit card provider pays the hotel and then collects the funds back from the card holder. With Obligo's model, just like in the hotel example, the renter pre-authorizes the landlord to charge them up to the required security deposit amount. The landlord is paid as soon as the charge is made, while the renter can repay the respective amount using installment plans with no interest. If they believe that the deduction is unreasonable, they maintain the option to dispute it according to local laws, just like with a traditional deposit. While our solution was originally built for credit-worthy tenants, we are currently in discussions with local nonprofit organizations to enable all renters to use our service, regardless of their credit. More and more landlords and renters across the country are adopting deposit alternatives. They do it because it removes friction and burden from the renting experience and delivers clear value to both sides. Our partners, both landlords and renters, prefer the credit-based model because of its transparent renters accountability, straightforwardness, and the lack of any fine print. We have not yet seen the full economic impact of COVID-19. Renters need options to keep more money in their pockets in this financial climate, whether it's for medical emergency, car payments, or college tuition. The practice of a renter turning over a full cash security deposit prior to moving in and the landlord having to keep these funds locked away in escrow is not the best option for either side. This is not a new problem, has just been exacerbated, and we need to act now. While we completely stand behind the need to provide renters with options, we are concerned that the current draft is only showcasing one out of the two deposit alternative models. Effectively, no landlord or renter who reads this bill as it's currently drafted would know about the only other option or a deposit alternative. If this is a renter's choice law, let's give renters in Columbus an actual choice and not be prescribing only one option. I came here today to express Obligo's support of this initiative and to ask that the final version will include a clear and transparent option of the credit-based pre-authorization service. Thank you so very much for your time.
Operating in a little over 20 states.
I'm sorry, I cannot hear you. You're breaking out.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I believe that you indicated in your testimony that Obligo is currently operating in a little over 20 states right now.
Correct.
Are you currently working with landlords or tenants in the Columbus market?
Not in Columbus. We are in Ohio, and we're in discussions with a few landlords in Columbus.
Okay. And how is Obligo's product different from other insurance or security deposit alternatives currently available? You made a few references in your testimony, and I do appreciate you bringing the example of how using a hotel reservation as a way of demonstrating how it could potentially work. But truly, how is it different than the other alternative that's currently on the market?
Sure. So the other options in the market right now are all insurance. That means that a renter buys a policy an insurance policy for their landlord, that the renter pays a monthly fee or an annual fee for a policy to guarantee that if and when there is a damage to the apartment, the insurance company would pay the landlord and then collect it back from the tenant. Now, we don't use that model for a lot of different reasons, which I will not get into right now. We use a credit model. Our tenant pre-authorizes the landlord to charge their payment methods from the get-go, if and when a charge happens. The landlord doesn't have to submit a claim. We don't scrutinize that claim. We're a third-party passive facilitator. I can't hear you again. I'm so sorry.
Shira, you broke up just a little bit at the end when you said that the landlord does not have to file a claim.
So with insurance companies, as we all know insurance, you need to submit a claim. And then the insurance company scrutinizes that claim, and then it pays the funds to the insurance to the landlord in this case, and goes back to the tenant to collect the funds. In our case, we're not scrutinizing the claims. We're mimicking the situation of traditional deposits, minus the need to actually provide cash.
All right. I want to apologize to residents and anyone who's happening to tune in. We're troubleshooting through some technological issues, so please continue to hang in there with us. Thank you for that explanation. Score in order to be able to work with your company. How would that actually work for folks who could find themselves in a financial predicament, and it's the reason why they need to use a product like Obligo?
Sorry, council member, the beginning of your question was broken out. Can you please repeat that?
Are using a credit best credit worthiness offers to have good credit in order to be able to use your product.
All right, I think I understood the question. So I hope I will answer it. I will answer your question. So we look at two main things when we look at renters. We look to see that they have some sort of minimal credit score, and we also look at their financial behavior according to our data analytics. So that means that we make sure that the account is live and it's not fraudulent, and the ability of repayment in case of a damage and so forth. We do have an option to assign a guarantor if you don't qualify for this service. That means that if you have a mother, a brother, a sister, a neighbor that does qualify and is willing to backstop your guarantee, we would qualify you as a renter with that guarantor. Now, having that said, we are in discussions with a few nonprofit organizations in Columbus to be able to offer our service to all renters, regardless of any qualification criteria. And I guess the last thing I would say, it's more of a side note. I would want to remind everybody that we are talking about renter's choice. We're not looking to be the sole option, right? There is no one solution that fits everybody, ever. So we're not asking to be the sole option. We're just trying to be an option.
And that is correct, Shira. And I think that just to level set this conversation, whether this type of legislation is enacted or not by this legislative body, you have the ability to work with landlords and tenants right now in the state of Ohio and the city of Columbus, as well as another company that participated in our first hearing, Rhino, also has the opportunity to work with landlords and tenants right now, regardless if this legislation is passed, right?
Yeah, 100%, and I appreciate that 100%. The one thing is that if there are two solutions in the market, insurance and credit, and only one is being prescribed in the legislation, insurance and other alternatives, nobody would know about the credit one.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to say.
I appreciate you clarifying that sentiment. Councilmember Remy, do you have any questions for Shira at this moment?
I sure do. Thank you very much. Hopefully we'll have as great a technological problems on my side. Shira, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I know this is the first time I've understood this side of the business, and you're right. Appreciate you pointing out that providing options, especially as chair of the Economic Development Committee, the freeing of capital out of deposits, is significant, and the impact to Columbus could be significant. I do have a few questions. I see you had mentioned that first of all, it is not an insurance product. We've established that. Are there any regulatory bodies that oversee the type of work that you do in the state of Ohio?
So, like insurance companies are regulated by insurance laws, we're regulated by credit laws, such as TILA, Truth in Lending Act, FCRA, Fair Credit Reporting Act, and we are compliant with all of them.
And so you mentioned that depending on the size of the deposit, the administrative fee would change. But if you could give me an idea, if I had $1,000 deposit, what would my cost be as a renter for ongoing administrative costs?
Sure. So it's very true that the service fee changes mainly according to the deposit size. I would say that most of our renters would pay somewhere between $5 to $15 a month.
And does that is that also influenced by credit score?
No.
Okay.
We do not change our prices based on any financial situation of a tenant. By the way, as a credit company, we're not allowed to, and we would not like to.
Okay. And so walk me through, we've got a tenant that's gone through the lease, and they have there's damages, and it's $1,500, for instance, on my $1,000 deposit. Well, obviously the landlord could get $1,000 from you. Is that correct?
Correct. So we would front the funds to the landlord, and then we would collect it back from the tenant. The way we would do that is we would ask the tenant, what payment method would you want to use? We would offer the tenant up to 4 installments with no interest at all. And we will collect it that way.
But the extra $500 then of that example would then be
that would be released. That would be released as the balance to the
right. So the landlord would be responsible for collecting that amount. And how? Okay, sorry.
So if the landlord charged $1,000 out of the $1,500, the landlord will release there is no cash held, right?
Oh, actually, I was doing it the opposite. There was $1,000 deposit and a $1,500 claim.
Oh, okay, so that's different. So it's like cash deposits today. If you have $1,000 cash deposit in your bank account for a tenant, and the tenant caused damage for $1,500, so you would take that $1,000 and you might want to go to small claims court for the additional $500.
Yeah.
Exactly the same.
Understood. And so, again, they would continue to pay the administrative charges. If they were to break the lease, for instance, that would be a valid claim, correct?
Anything that's, according to the lease, yeah.
Okay. And how fast do you pay those claims out?
We initiate them right away. Sometimes it takes 2 to 3 business days for the transfer itself.
And looking at other markets that you're in, I mean, these concepts are all new to Columbus for the most part. So regardless of whether we pass this legislation or not, this is this is new territory. And so when you look at some areas where you might have more critical mass, both you and insurance products, what are some of those communities? I would imagine they're like New York City, Chicago, but what type of penetration has your product and insurance products? You may not be able to answer that, but I'm just curious, have there been cities where there's been mass where you've made penetration?
Sure. So we started in New York City. Naturally, that's where we penetrated the most. We work there with big companies such as Skytown, who's owned by Blackstone, Stone Equities. I'm not sure if these names would mean anything to you, but they are pretty big lenders in New York City. We also work with national companies like Aimco, which is one of the top 50 in the US. So our New York is, I guess, our biggest market now, but we're all over at this point.
Understood. Okay. And then, so I'm just thinking if there's any other questions I have on the, is there any cost to apply? So for instance, they're looking at the three products, a traditional deposit, and then the insurance product and your product. Any cost to apply, and how fast does the renter get a decision made?
No cost to apply. The renter gets a decision, I would say 5 minutes. The whole process for the renter takes, it gets decision right away.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your time.
Sure, thank you.
All right, hopefully you guys can hear me now. Is it better?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, I am wondering, Shayla, how long has your company been in operation?
Almost 3 years.
3 years now. Okay, great. And if folks watching want to get additional information about the product that you have, where can they go and find that information?
So they can either email me or call me or anybody else in the company. Each one of us would be happy to help. I can provide my email after this hearing, and that would be probably the easiest.
Does your company have a website address folks
Of
can
course.
reference?
Of course, it's myobligo.com.
Myobligo.com.
Correct.
Thank you. And once again, I want to reiterate to folks who are tuning in to this conversation around renters' choice, over the course of the last month or so, as we've been engaging in these stakeholder conversations, we've had a lot of feedback about this idea of renters' choice. We welcome that feedback, and I want to reiterate what the intent is behind this legislation. And so we're being very cognizant about how we move forward, specifically as it relates to renters' choice, because the idea is to make sure that there is a true choice that helps individuals who need the assistance at any season in their life. But it's important that we measure those unintended consequences to the best of our ability. These products are already on the market, so if there is someone that's watching, please feel free to reach out to Shayla or her team to see if those products fit your lifestyle at the moment. And so with that, I just want to thank Shayla for her attendance today. And I see that Council President Harden has joined us this evening. Council President Harden, do you have any remarks you'd like to make this evening?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my other council member. I think I see Councilmember Remy, who's on as well. Just want to thank you for your leadership. I think this is a really important conversation as we move forward with a housing agenda. I'm just really appreciative of your leadership, and it looks like I must have missed a couple of the of the presentations, but I've got some on the backside. So I just look forward to further conversation and in you bringing this forward to council.
Thank you, Council President. And you've only missed one, so you're doing just good this evening. It's a big day in the United States of America, so I will excuse your tardiness today. With that, I'd like to introduce Kirsten Carr and Jennifer Knoll with MORPSI to talk with us about the regional housing study and how that work aligns with our current proposal. Ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Council Member. I'm going to take a moment here to share my screen. We have a brief presentation for you this evening. And if I may, can I receive confirmation that everyone is able to see that in full screen mode?
Jennifer, are you sharing your screen or is Kirsten?
I am sharing my screen.
Okay.
I see you, not.
See you. We're not able to see your presentation. Did you go to share at the?
I did. Let's see if we can try that again.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. So that's available. With that, I'll ask Kirsten Carr if she's able to just do a mic check here because she will kick us off this evening.
I know it doesn't seem to work. Can you guys hear me?
We can now.
Oh, awesome. Yay. All right. Well, thank you so much for inviting us to be here today. Good afternoon, Councilwoman Favor, Council President Harden, and council members. Really appreciate the opportunity to just give a brief overview of the regional housing strategy and then answer any questions you might have. Also want to take that opportunity to thank you, Councilwoman Favor, and the many staff members of the Department of Development for their active engagement during the process, and especially now for all of you to work so hard in advancing some of the strategies that came out of the regional housing strategy. If you go to the next slide, Jennifer. So just some background, the regional housing strategy kicked off last year with the goal to create a coordinated housing strategy for Central Ohio that provides investment and policy recommendations to support our communities and our growing population. And as you all know, we happen to be doing this work at a very critical time. COVID-19 has radically changed public and private resources and is also shining a bright light on social injustice and racial inequality. And so with this in mind, we thought that this presented an opportunity for the regional housing strategy to kind of pivot with our stakeholders to address these disparities through maybe an even stronger equity and recovery lens. And so through the process, our stakeholders told us that they envision a future for Central Ohio where growth and recovery help realize more equity among Central Ohioans, not less. And housing where it's built or maintained, who it's for and how it's priced, can be a platform for this vision. MORPSI served as a project coordinator and provided staff support throughout the development of the regional housing strategy, but we were fortunate enough to work with an excellent consultant team led by Enterprise Community Partners, who are nationally known for their work in housing, particularly affordable housing, as well as with several local partners who really helped with the financial side, the market analysis, and also the public engagement. But equally important to this process was also the role of our stakeholders and community leaders. And so between the project sponsors and the advisory board, the regional housing strategy was guided by nearly 100 regional leaders, representing over 50 organizations across public, private, nonprofit, and philanthropic sectors. And in addition to that, we heard from many others throughout the process, either via surveys or workshops and interviews. It was really a broad endeavor, certainly little bit limited as we had to move to a virtual world, but we still think that we were as inclusive as we possibly could. And since this was a regional housing strategy, we also took a regional approach to the work. The main area of the study was the 7-county region that you see in the red boundary here, but at times we had to pull in data from the larger urbanized area as well. There are obviously a lot of wonderful groups, many on the phone on this webinar today too, that have been studying the existing market conditions here in Central Ohio for a while. So the purpose of the regional housing strategy was not to duplicate that work, but rather to use it as a starting point and identify where we could, fill in gaps and expand as well. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that we used a bunch of different study elements that were kind of unique to the regional housing strategy. You can look at them on their own, but layered together, they really help to provide us deeper understanding of market conditions across the region. So the first one, it's called the submarket analysis, which essentially helps us paint a picture of areas with greatest similarities in terms of physical characteristics, the housing stock, and the local housing market. This was really important to us, again, because it was a regional housing strategy. And therefore, the city of Marysville or London or, Licking County could figure out which submarkets are similar to areas and neighborhoods in their region and could apply the strategies there as well. We also did a displacement risk analysis that identified the areas that are most vulnerable to housing market gentrification and resident displacement. And then last, but certainly not least, we integrated Curvin Institute's opportunity mapping tool to evaluate 15 indicators of opportunity across transportation, housing, education, health, and employment. And these findings reveal some very unfortunate but familiar patterns. So when you look at this map, the very low opportunity areas that persist across the region today match up almost perfectly with the redlining maps from decades ago. And so as we're thinking about, back 50, 60 years and understanding that we really haven't moved the needle in getting people out of poverty, in some cases even made it worse, it shows that urgency of doing more and really thinking about how do we implement those strategies. Out of this research, there were 5 core regional core housing issues that emerged, which essentially became the framework for the regional housing strategy. Those are the 5 that you see on the slide here. The first one, increased competition for homes. This is really driven by increased population growth and the low rate of housing production. The second one is barriers limiting access to homes. This is related to disparities in lending practices, creditworthiness, housing instability, and housing discrimination. We also know that we have a limited supply of homes priced for low-income households, and especially as more homes are built for higher price points, the region is losing affordable single-family rentals, and demand for rental assistance outweighs supply. We also have a demand for more diverse housing stock, homes that can serve a wider range of ages, abilities, and household sizes. And then last but not least, again, housing instability among Central Ohioans is a big issue and is reflected by cost burden rates, evictions, homelessness, and homes in repair, in need of repair. And so I think it's worth noting here that these issues were identified before COVID-19, but now with COVID-19 and the racial, health, and economic disparities it's highlighted really only serve to add urgency to these issues. And I know all of you are very much aware of this, and that's why we're so appreciative of the efforts that you are already doing to move the needle here. Just to highlight a few of the factors contributing to our region's core housing issues. For one, there are over 200,000 households spending more than 30% of their income on housing. Half of them are spending more than 50% of their income on housing. Renter households are twice as likely to be cost burdened than owner households, and low to middle income households are about 9 times as likely to be cost burdened than higher income earners. And related to being cost burdens, we're also sadly seeing Central Ohio with way too many evictions per day. Again, you guys are very much aware of this and are actively fighting against this. COVID has further highlighted this issue, and we can expect it to get worse if more businesses are suffering and are putting people out of work. And of course, when you're struggling to make ends meet, it's so easy to prioritize groceries or medical appointments over rent and to slip into the eviction phase. And sadly, what we're seeing too, when we compare Central Ohio to the rest of the nation, that our eviction rate exceeds the national average and is particularly troubling in high poverty areas and majority African American areas as well. And to the point of housing production, unfortunately, our region, just like the rest of the nation, has experienced low housing production relative to population growth. So when you look at the slide, in the 2000s, 1 housing unit was built for every 2 new residents in the region. In the 2010s, there was 1 housing unit built for every 3 new residents. So really, for the first time in history, we're experiencing a deficit in the production of new housing, and we're all seeing it in house prices being excessively high. The Columbus real estate market can tell you how quickly homes are turned around and being sold, and making it very, very difficult in terms of affordability and even just finding a place to live in the neighborhood of choice. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk a little bit more about the conversations we've had with the development community and the financial side, and what are some of the core strategies we're suggesting moving forward.
Thank you, Kirsten. So we know that we can't just build our way out of a housing crisis, but as Kirsten just showed, more housing can be part of the solution and needs to be part of the solution. We also need more diverse options when it comes to our housing choices. So we wanted to understand why it's not happening here in Central Ohio. And we did this by talking to a number of residential developers across the region. And what you see here are the four most pressing issues that they brought to our attention. First has to do with land use processes and approvals. These vary from community to community and sometimes even within the same community across our region. And these differences can generate uncertainty in a process that is already time-bound and costly for developers. What we heard from them was that it's really helpful to have clear expectations that they can utilize. That helps to streamline the process and save money, not only for them, but for our communities as well. Second is the increased cost of construction materials and labor. This is one of the biggest drivers of economics here in Central Ohio, but unfortunately, it's also one of the factors that we have the least control over. So from our perspective, this has us thinking, if we can't control for that factor, it really makes these other three that much more critical. Regional developers told us that the lack of public and political support affects development feasibility here in Central Ohio. Negative perceptions about denser or subsidized homes simply result in people voicing their disapproval locally, and that can be the make or break for whether or not a project moves forward. And then finally, money. Money is needed up front to finance construction. Oftentimes, a developer's initial loan installment does not cover all of these costs, so additional funds are needed to bridge the gap between the initial loan and the final amount of permanent financing. But unfortunately, there is only a limited amount of gap financing available, and that can be a deciding factor as well as to whether or not a project moves forward. So when it comes to regional financial resources, there is some good news here. We uncovered that there are over 50 financial resources here in Central Ohio that exist to develop housing. Yes, we need more, but we also need to uncomplicate and demystify those resources that already exist. Better coordination among these resources is also needed, particularly when it comes to direct resident assistance. One of the biggest challenges is that those who administer the programs oftentimes don't have connections to those in need, and those in need oftentimes are not aware of the programs or how they can receive that assistance. Solving these challenges is not going to be easy, but the regional housing strategy lays out a roadmap that Central Ohio can follow together toward solutions. There are over 100 actions in the regional housing strategy with the potential to be scaled or started here in Central Ohio. And thanks to our advisory board, we worked with them to help prioritize the 5 actions that you see here. These were the actions that we were told really have the most sort of momentum behind them for implementation here in this first year. So I'll walk through each of these in a little bit more detail. First is adopting a green tape development review process, and this addresses increased competition for homes by removing or lowering regulatory barriers. This can again save both time and money for developers and the community. Enacting source of income protection laws, or otherwise expanding fair housing laws. This addresses barriers limiting access to homes. Without these protections, some households may face barriers to utilizing housing assistance programs to secure their housing. We're already seeing several communities, in addition to Columbus, Bexley, and Westerville, have taken an interest in source of income protections. We know many other cities around the region are interested in learning more about this. Creation of a state housing tax credit. This supports priority housing development to address a limited supply of homes for low-income households. A state housing tax credit could be one potential solution to providing that much needed additional gap financing for affordable and mixed income housing. Of course, this is not something that Central Ohio can take on its own. This is something that's going to require a coordinated effort with our peer regions across the state. Next, we heard about a creation of a pilot program to support the development of diverse lower cost housing products. And this will help to address the demand for a more diverse housing stock. Simply put, as Central Ohio continues to grow and our region continues to diversify, we need more housing options to support people of all ages, abilities, and household sizes. And then finally, a need for more tenant-based rental assistance to address housing instability. This was, I think, coming into the start of the regional housing strategy, one of the most urgent concerns that we heard from our stakeholders. Here we are now as we continue to deal with the fallout from COVID-19, and the urgency remains at least as critical as it was at the start of this project. So we know there's a need for more, and it's something that we're going to continue to hear from our stakeholders as well as our residents across Central Ohio. To learn more about those 5 priority actions and all of the actions in the regional housing strategy, we invite you to visit the project website. That's at morpse.org/RHS. Everything you need to get started is available online now, and we're going to be continuing to add more resources in the weeks and months ahead. One of the resources we're particularly excited about is the Implementers Toolkit. This tool provides a user-friendly way to learn more about the unique housing submarkets that make up Central Ohio's housing landscape. You can filter through the menu of actions to learn more about each one of them, and there are different ways that you can interact with this tool. You can explore each action on its own or by housing issue or housing submarket. You can also explore all of the actions that could be implemented within your jurisdiction, in this case within the city of Columbus. And once you do that, you can bring up a housing action profile for each of those actions that provides a deeper, detailed description along with case studies and examples of where that action has been implemented in other places throughout the country. We really believe that Central Ohio has an opportunity to capitalize on the momentum surrounding the regional housing strategy and really begin to address the region's core housing issues. We're encouraging all of our communities in the region, including Columbus, to get started right away. The Implementers Toolkit and those 5 priority actions can be a good first place to start. MORPSE is not stepping away from this work either. We look forward to continuing to be champions for this project and to support our communities to address housing concerns. This may take on different forms, including helping communities to develop their own local housing action agendas, like you see here on the screen. And this is a process that will localize those regional findings with a mini strategic plan that provides data and context-sensitive strategies for your community. Earlier this month, MORPSE also announced another new program designed to keep the conversation going. This is our Regional Housing Strategy Speaker Series. We're going to be bringing together thought leaders from around the country to discuss innovative housing programs and policies. Our first session happens on February 19th, and we'll focus on innovative designs that can help communities to provide more residential options at a wider variety of price points. We're really excited about this and hope that all of you can join us for it. In closing, we would be remiss if we didn't share our project sponsors slide. To echo what Kirsten said at the beginning, we're truly grateful for the leadership and support from the City of Columbus. It's been wonderful to work with you all throughout this process and to learn from you and grow with you as we address these issues. As you can see, though, you're not alone. Housing is an issue that affects every community here in Central Ohio, and so it's wonderful to see not only so many Central Ohio communities come together around this effort, but also representatives from the private sector and the nonprofit community as well. It's going to take all of us working together towards solutions, and so it's wonderful to see that we've already got that attitude and that approach happening with this process. So with that, I will turn things back over to Kirsten for any closing remarks.
No, thank you, Jennifer. This was a good ending, and I think with that, we just want to open it up for questions or any remarks or comments you have. And I guess maybe the last thing I want to say, besides the housing speaker series that we're putting on different topics related to housing, bringing in national speakers, we also are thinking about, what is MORPSE's role moving forward? How can we continue to, host and facilitate conversations regarding the first one, green tape development? We're talking with the BIA about, can we host a joint session of the developers and the local governments to kind of talk about that issue particularly? And so forth. So if you have any ideas of, how we as MORPSE could help make sure that this is not a plan that ends on the shelf, but is truly moving towards implementation, and not just that, but moving the needle and making things right, that would be very much appreciated.
Thank you, ladies, so much for that presentation. And let me extend my appreciation to MORPSE for the amount of work and dedication that it took to see this massive regional housing study all the way to completion. This was a long time in the making. We recognize as the City of Columbus that this truly is a regional housing issue, and Columbus cannot solve this crisis on its own. I often say that we're not going to be able to build ourselves out of affordable housing crisis. So it's really good to see that you all, the way that we are working and moving, the housing study underscores that frame of reference that we're working in right now, and also underscores two of the recommendations that you all have provided. Columbus has already implemented in some shape or form, or attempting to implement in some shape or form, that being the tenant-based rental assistance program, which kicked off a little over a year or so ago with just a pot of $300,000. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, but also fortunately with the pandemic, we did receive dollars from the federal government, which did allow us to allot money to a tenant-based rental assistance program so that it can continue, so that residents could receive emergency rental assistance along with legal representation if need be, and mediation assistance as well. And then also the second recommendation being source of income discrimination, which is what we are here discussing this evening. So ladies, to you, are there other communities in the region considering similar policies that we have introduced in Columbus right now? Oh, Kirsten, you're on mute.
Well, it would help if I mute myself. Yeah, thank you for that question. And just a heads up that Jennifer is trying to log back on for some way she got kicked off. But yes, I think she mentioned, especially for income source protection, there's Bexley, who has already implemented a policy. We know that Westerville and the city of Reynoldsburg are actively working on one as well. And if it's helpful, we talked to all of these communities already about maybe hosting a meeting to really make sure that they can share language and maybe templates with each other. They're all struggling with similar considerations that you're thinking through in terms of enforcement and how to make this a really effective policy as well, and how to make sure that it's not, how to bring the landlord community along, I guess, at the same time. So we're happy to do that, but we're definitely seeing positive movement there. When it comes to the priority area related to green tape development, we know that the city of Reynoldsburg is kind of ahead of the curve in terms of having a updated comprehensive plan and an updated zoning code that is actually denser than what the comprehensive plan calls for, to allow the flexibility of development to come in as needed. They are actively working about the East-West corridor as well, and thinking about how to ensure multifamily and mixed use, mixed income communities around there that then also have that true access to transit and mobility options as well.
Thank you so much. I know that you acknowledge that source of income is one of the recommendations from the regional housing study, but do you see any of the other proposed ordinances that we're discussing here tonight, renter's choice, rental receipt, advancing the goals of the housing study?
If I see them to advance the goals, or if other communities are doing it? Absolutely. I think it's, yeah, absolutely. I think it's wonderful that you're doing it. And I think you will definitely stand out as a leader in that area for other communities that are looking at you in terms of what you're doing there.
And last, how does Morphe plan to track the progress of the housing study recommendations moving forward?
Oh my gosh, we're so close of having that information, that dashboard ready and included in this presentation, but not quite yet. We're actually having a session for all the regional housing strategy participants next Friday, where we're kicking off and demonstrating that regional dashboard, and it will be a kind of interactive form of being able to really see the progress we're doing on key metrics as well. So stay tuned.
Wonderful. Let me turn it over to my colleagues, Council President Harden, Councilmember Remy. Do either of you have any questions? All right. Well, ladies, that means you did a phenomenal job. I thank you for your time this evening, and please, once again, just accept our appreciation on behalf of the City of Columbus for all the work that you all have done in this housing space and the work that you're going to continue to do. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Finally, I'd like to introduce Scott Sherlock and his team from CMHA to address the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Scott, the floor is yours.
Scott, you're on mute.
Take. All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having us here. Can you confirm, Scott Amaral, if you can see my screen?
I can.
Great. Okay, well, first off, I would like to thank Councilmember Remy and Favor and Council President Harding for inviting CMHA to this public hearing. We greatly appreciate your efforts today and everything that you guys do for our city, and especially the leadership that you guys have taken on regarding housing in our community. Obviously, housing is very important to us, so we want to thank you for that. So I am Scott Sherlock, for those of you that don't know me, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority. And we've been asked to come here today to talk a little bit about our Housing Choice Voucher Program. I have brought a couple colleagues with me to kind of help answer some questions and take on a couple things. So I have Scott Amaral, our CMHA General Counsel and previous acting VP of the voucher program. I have Justin Davis, our Vice President of the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And together, yes. And together,
I think that you can put your presentation in full screen.
Okay. Let's see here. Is it not on full screen right now?
No, this is the one that has your notes.
Okay, let me try this again.
Okay.
Let's see here.
So if you open the slideshow, sir, you want to run the show.
Let's see. How's that? Can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Let's try this. Is that any better?
At the bottom of the screen, sir,
Yes.
there's what looks like a presentation shade. You go right down to that bottom menu on the
All right, let's try this.
right of your screen. Click that.
How's that?
That's perfect, sir. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Sorry about that technical difficulty there. So just a little bit, a quick brief history on CMHA for those who don't know. We are a public housing authority established in 1934 by the Ohio legislature. CMHA began constructing housing in the late 1930s. And it wasn't until 1974 that Congress authorized Section 8 program to provide rental subsidies for eligible families to reside in the private market, understanding that the need for affordable housing was much greater than housing authorities could actually offer and develop themselves. So today, CMHA has actually grown to own more than 4,000 multifamily homes ourselves. And we administer around 12,600 housing choice vouchers in the community today. So CMHA's mission is to help people access affordable housing through collaborative partnerships to develop, renovate, and maintain housing, promote neighborhood revitalization, and to assist residents in accessing needed social services. CMHA's core values are community, commitment, and collaboration. And a part of our collaboration is working with all of our partners and all of the collaborators in the community. And a large portion of those collaborators we consider to be our landlords. Probably one of the greatest assets of our Housing Choice Voucher Program. As I mentioned, CMHA has two housing programs. We have the units that are owned by CMHA, and then we have our Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is our largest local housing program that we actually administer today. So CMHA's jurisdiction is within Franklin County. And on our current wait list for our Housing Choice Voucher Program, we have over 24,000 people that are in need that are currently in our lottery pool. And we have 12,600 active vouchers on the street today. CMHA pays rental subsidies every month to private landlords, rent in the amount of just over $8 million. And our annual housing payments made to landlords is going to be projected at about $96 million this year. Currently, we have over 3,000 unique landlords in our program today. So 3,000 different landlords that are currently participating with one or more units in the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Our vouchers are currently in over 30 different zip codes in Franklin County. The projected 10-year impact of rental assistance is expected to exceed $1 billion. So when I say that, you can understand the scale of our program. We're looking to scale up a little bit. In the course of the next year or two, CMHA will be pulling from our lottery pool consistently between now and then, and we will be actually growing and expanding our program. And what this means to the landlord folks out there is that there is going to be a need for additional affordable housing and an additional need for landlords to rent to residents that are in need and that have housing choice vouchers. I also think it's important to acknowledge that CMHA has been a HUD designated high performing voucher program for 10 years in a row. And what that means is that HUD grades a housing authority on 10 KPIs every year, and CMHA has hit every single one of those. So we are doing what we're supposed to be doing in terms of getting our program out there and leasing up units according to our program. So the lease up process is probably the main thing that we want to talk about today, and probably what our questions will be. So I have Scott Amaral. I will pass the mic over to you. And if you could just walk through the lease up process and how the voucher program works.
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having all of us here to explain our Housing Choice Voucher Program and our lease-up process. I think it's really important to understand that the lease-up process is, in fact, relatively easy. One of the biggest hesitations for landlords in many jurisdictions, including this one, is their mistaken belief that they're about to embark on an overly complicated and cumbersome process. And we believe that is not the case, and we believe that it actually provides many benefits and is a relatively easy process to get through. So the landlord's involvement starts, there's 3 steps for the landlords once they have been working with a potential tenant. The first one is the request for tenancy approval. The second one is unit inspection. And then the third one is probably the most important for the landlords. It's the execution of the contract with us. It's called a housing assistance payment contract. And that's what allows the landlord to get paid by CMHA for the particular tenant in their unit. So starting with the request for tenancy approval, it is a form document that CMHA provides to their tenants when they're out looking for a unit, and the landlord will fill that out and provide basic information about the particular unit, the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms, other amenities, including what utilities, appliances, et cetera, that the landlord will provide with the unit. So once that is filled out, the landlord is going to provide that along with an unsigned lease, a vendor information form, which includes their information so that they can get paid and that we can track them in our system. There's a lead paint disclosure form that they have to fill out, and then they have to also fill out and submit a utility affidavit, which establishes what utilities might or might not be provided with the unit. Once that is filled out, the landlord gives that back to the tenant to sign and date the form, and then they submit that to CMHA for approval. So once CMHA has that, the next step is to schedule the inspection of the unit. And we try to do that as soon as possible. And we actually provide a data transfer to our inspections team that happens every day. So at the beginning of each day or the end of each day, we'll submit it to the inspections team. The inspections team will get it the next morning. Then they will start working on scheduling the inspection. And our standard is to have an inspection scheduled no later than 10 calendar days from the receipt of the request for tenancy approval. A caveat to the smooth inspection process is that we ask landlords to make sure that their units are ready for inspection at the time that the RTA is submitted. That usually will eliminate some bumps along the way. But once it's submitted and scheduled, the inspection takes place and the unit is inspected according to what are called Housing Quality Standards, or HQS. These are federally mandated standards that are required to be met in order for a unit to be subsidized with federal dollars. Following the inspection, the landlord will be notified for any items that do not pass. Hopefully everything passes, but unfortunately, there are many situations where one or two items do not pass inspection. And in that event, the landlord is notified immediately. They are given the opportunity to correct them. They need to notify CMHA once the corrections are made, and then we will schedule a follow-up inspection, and we make every attempt to do that within 5 days of receiving notification from the landlord that the inspections are complete or the repairs are complete. So then once we get to that point where everything passes, the next step is that the landlord and tenant will actually sign and complete the lease agreement, creating a legal relationship between the landlord and the tenant. That lease is then submitted to CMHA. We will review it, make sure that everything is in order, and then we prepare the housing assistance payment contract and provide that to the landlord for execution by the landlord. Once that's executed by the landlord, returned to us, we countersign it, and that's at the point where we can initiate the subsidy payment to the landlord. And I think at this point, it's important to remember that the federal laws and regulations prohibit the housing authority from signing a HAP contract before an inspection passes for a unit and making any payments to a landlord before the HAP contract is actually signed. So those are two areas that we follow up on diligently when we have a relationship with existing landlords and certainly with new landlords. So the question then usually becomes, well, how long does all of this take? And we are very pleased to have this statistic available, which shows that we move from the submission of the inspection request or the request for tenancy approval through the inspection process to lease up 86% of the time. That happens between 1 and 30 days. About another 12% occur between 31 and 60 days. And then we're down to 2% and 1% for the 60 to 90 day category and the over 90 days category. And those are usually when there are relatively serious issues with units that take quite some time to fix. But as you can see, 98% of these units go from the submission of the request for tenancy approval to lease up and HAP execution within 60 days. So that's a good number for landlords to know. landlords, once the HAP contract is signed, I think it's also important to understand that landlords have continuing obligations, as our participants do. Landlords are obligated to maintain the premises in accordance with the housing quality standards at all times during the lease. For leases that go on beyond a year, there is an annual inspection that has to occur each year that the lease is in place. And if a special inspection is necessary based on either some kind of an event or some kind of contact from the participant that something might be wrong, they also have to allow for special inspections. And then the third category is that, especially after the lease starts, the landlord must complete any required repairs within specified timeframes in order to continue receiving the housing subsidy. But all of that is explained to landlords on a continuing basis. And our goal is to have a relationship with landlords so that they understand what their ongoing responsibilities are. I think it's also very important for everybody to understand that the Housing Choice Voucher Program really consists of three separate relationships. The first one is between CMHA and the participant or the tenant, and that has its own set of responsibilities for the participant and the tenant to follow in order to ensure that their participation continues. The second one is between CMHA and the landlord, and that really centers around the housing assistance payments contract and the relationship that we have with the landlord continuing to comply with HQS standards and other aspects of the HAP contract. And the last relationship is between the landlord and the tenant themselves. And that has to be a separate relationship because CMHA is not equipped nor is it authorized under federal law to handle any of the relationship, whether it's positive or negative between landlords and tenants. We're here to move forward with different relationships and in our relationship with a tenant or a landlord in case there's a dispute. But CMHA is not the entity that will negotiate or arbitrate any disputes that occur between landlords and tenants. So we have resources available on our website. There are briefings, there are other inspection checklists, and we have a Housing Choice Voucher Guidebook. And then there's also a resource on here so that you can look and see what a sample HAP contract looks like. That is a HUD mandated form. So for the attorneys out there, that's not something that we can negotiate. That's a standard form that all parties have to agree to. But we have a dedicated landlord relations team. And certainly our goal is to create an ongoing relationship and a wonderful and collaborative relationship with our landlords, as they are an essential element to the success of our Housing Choice Voucher Program. And we need them in order to meet our goals and to meet everybody's goals of making sure that we have affordable housing for the participants that we have and the many who currently are on CMHA's wait list. So that's a quick overview of the program. I'm certainly available to answer any questions, as is the other Scott, but that's a quick overview.
Thank you to both of you for your presentation this evening. This was incredibly helpful. I'm going to switch things up a little bit and allow Councilmember Remy to kick things off with questions for you all this evening. Councilmember?
Thank you so much, Councilmember Favor. So the first question is, presumably if we enact this legislation, more inventory comes online that's available for housing choice vouchers. Does that mean that you have more vouchers to give?
That does not mean that we have more vouchers to give. Our vouchers are dictated by two things. Number one, HUD has a number that they assign to us, and then they also have a dollar amount that they assign to us. So we have to watch both the number of vouchers that we have available to us as well as the dollar amounts. The good news in this particular situation is that we do have vouchers to issue right now. We will be issuing a good number of vouchers all through 2021. And the reason for that is because of additional funding that we received as a result of higher costs and higher expenses during the COVID-19 situation.
Thank you.
And Councilmember Arimi, I'll just jump in that CMHA, I mentioned we have 24,000 applicants in our lottery pool, and we have already started pulling people off of that list and putting them on a wait list and getting them prepped to issue vouchers. So probably within the next 30 to 60 days, you're going to start seeing the new issuances of vouchers out on the street, and all those residents are going to be looking for new homes. So if there are landlords out there that are teetering on participating or want to learn more about it, there is going to be an opportunity out there for you to rent your units.
Thanks. Thank you, Scott. I can't go wrong with saying Scott today, right?
No, you can't.
Correct.
So in looking at this inspection process, some of these numbers that you gave me are a little mind numbing to ask, a landlord to keep their property unrented, therefore not getting paid, during that time. Really need to figure out how we can make this more succinct and what that will take in order for you guys to be able to do that. With a shorter inspection time, I do have some questions about the process. So if there is a quality issue and there's like a number of quality issues on a property, on the reinspection, do they have to, I'd heard something about potentially they had to schedule separate inspections for each, or is it one?
Well, that would be the landlord's choice. So, we would encourage, if let's say that there's 5 areas where there's a fail, we would encourage the landlord to correct those 5 areas as quickly as possible and then schedule a single inspection or a single re-inspection to look at all 5 of those areas. That is obviously the most efficient, and that would decrease the amount of time that's necessary for the process.
Got it.
And Councilmember, our slide that said 86% of vouchers are going to be issuing leased up within 30 days. I think it's important to understand that of those 86, a large portion of those are going to lease up the day after their first initial inspection, which is going to be less than 10 days from the landlord meeting the tenant. It's when we find a housing quality violation where the house doesn't meet the minimum standards that HUD says it must meet, is when it's going to get prolonged longer than 10 days or even 60 or 90 days. And when it's prolonged more than 30, 60 or 90 days, that house is going to have some significant physical issues that don't allow it to qualify for the HUD program. And frankly, if the house isn't qualifying for our HUD, for our HQS standards, it's probably not the best place to live. Understood.
Yeah, for sure. So I took the liberty as a realtor and a member of the National Association of Realtors to speak with our group about their expertise in this, and they provided me with several examples of housing authorities around the country. And what that really impressed upon me is we're as a body, we're trying to do some progressive things to help those most in need in the community. And I mentioned this to Councilmember Favor, and I really thank her for arranging you guys to speak this evening. We need to push on you to be a very progressive housing authority to match, some of the things that we're doing. And one of those is the streamlined inspections. The Housing Opportunity Through Modernization Act of 2016 authorized you guys to approve units before lease up, before passing an inspection, before passing an inspection. What why are you not doing that today? What prohibits you from doing that? Why can't we work towards that model so that we can eliminate those days that a landlord might have to wait for inspection, get somebody into a property, and then they're retroactively reimbursed once they have been approved?
Yeah, I think we've looked at that as an agency and determined that it wasn't in the best interest in the past. What would happen is you could get somebody to move into a unit where the landlord refused or never actually got to the past state of the housing quality standards inspection, and then you have a tenant living in a unit that doesn't meet the HUD requirements, and now they have to go and move again. So there's an opportunity for additional burden, but something that we could certainly look into again.
And, there were a number of different examples throughout Cambridge and Marin out in California where they had created, like, for instance, vacancy loss assistance pools. The housing authority had security deposit pool assistance for the housing authority had done that. And so, what prohibits CMHA from doing that within the city of Columbus?
Scott, would those regulations be for housing authorities that have other designations where they can use HAP dollars for those kinds of things other than rental payments?
Well, it's a combination of both. I mean, what I think that council member, I think what you're really getting at is creating a landlord incentive program that allows for vacancy payments, et cetera. You do have to follow a process to move forward with those types of things. A lot of the agencies that are designated by HUD as being moving to work agencies have the ability to propose programs like that. We are also looking, forward looking towards trying to create some sort of landlord incentive programs that would allow us to do things exactly like that. But we are not yet a moving to work agency. And, obviously we have to follow the HUD rules and regulations in order to create those programs. But those are types of things that we are looking at, as we do understand that, we need to be in a position to attract landlords and make it easy as we can to participate in our program.
And the moving to work agencies are what we would call like an MTW housing authority. They have the ability to change the funding from what we get as HAP dollars from the federal government to spend on rent. They can take those HAP dollars and they can kind of dice them up a little bit in different ways and use them for other things. While right now we are restricted to only use those for HAP. So they only allow a couple small cohorts of housing authorities to participate in the MTW program. And as additional cohorts are released and available, CMHA is certainly looking into every opportunity to be able to do that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I would certainly just challenge all of us, to work towards creating programs, innovative programs that really help to meet our end goal. And certainly, my concerns, obviously getting housing for all and as much housing for those in need. That almost sounded like the buzzer. Did I just get buzzed? But I also want to make sure that, we don't put an undue burden on business. So, that has, I'm concerned about 30-day waits, for instance, for a reinspection. Those are the types of things that, make people raise rents so they're not even affordable to begin with. There's just, a variety of tactics that they could use that would prohibit them from necessarily ever qualifying again for housing for those that need it. So I want to make sure that we're not creating an environment where all of a sudden those types of landlords, find ways to mitigate having to rent to anybody that they that are in need.
Sorry about that. I was muted. Thanks. There really wouldn't be a standard 30-day wait for a reinspection where a landlord would not be getting paid. So when we come out and we fail the unit for the first time, if it's a new contract, we'll come out there and the inspector will tell the landlord what items need to be fixed. As soon as those items are fixed, the landlord can call us and we will schedule to be out there within hopefully about 5 calendar days. If the landlord fails an inspection on an annual inspection, we would schedule something 28 to 30 days out. But during that time period, the landlord is still being paid.
Yeah, I understand on the reinspection. I guess what would it take to get down to a standard that, you know, that the inspection would take place within 5 days? More inspectors?
Now, are you talking about the initial inspection when they're trying to lease up a contract?
Correct.
That's a good question. I don't know if I have an answer to that right now, but we can certainly look into that and follow up.
I mean, we have to make it practical for people to that we're asking them, you know, if we're going to legislate that, we have to make it practical for them. You know, there's too many variables that could extend this out to 30 to 60 days. And I want to make sure that we're working towards a policy where, you know, okay, we'll make sure that there's an inspector out. Now, in talking with Michelle Heritage, you know, they've hired their own inspectors, correct?
Yes, I believe they do have an inspector working for them.
Yeah, so that, you know, their standard's 24 hours. And so the city presumably could hire our own inspectors and be reimbursed from HUD for those inspections in order to guarantee that time frame. Is that correct?
I have not heard a relationship with the city doing that. I'm not sure.
No, I understand. We aren't now, but we could. I mean, we could follow a similar model to ensure that the inspections were taking place in the right amount of time, as Michelle Heritage is with the Community Housing Network.
You know, CMHA is currently using a third-party contractor to do our HQS inspections. So we could sit down and have a conversation with them and see what it would take to decrease the days that we would commit to for inspection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I appreciate that cooperation. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. Council President Harden? You're all good there. I just have a few questions for you all. You did acknowledge that you have hired a third party to assist with the inspection process. Is that in light of the pandemic? And are those inspections being conducted virtually at this time?
So the inspections are actually being conducted in person at this time. HUD had issued, as part of their response to COVID, a certain number of waivers that we actually did take advantage of for a while last summer. But the end result is that there needs to be a physical inspection that takes place. And so when it became appropriate, we did reinstitute the actual physical inspections. But we do have exceptions available for COVID-related reasons. In the event that a family is, impacted by COVID, uncomfortable having an inspector in their house, we are currently working around that. We have not yet moved to a virtual inspection platform, mostly because we haven't really seen a platform yet that satisfies the concerns that we have about the ability to mask or, overlook certain quality standards that need to be met. It is something that I think is a growing industry at this time, but right now, like I said, we have not really found anything that really meets our standards for ensuring that we're doing what is appropriate in terms of the inspection.
Thank you. One of the, when we've been meeting with stakeholders, one of the consistent critiques of CMHA was the lack of consistency as it relates to the level of discretion permitted during the inspection phase of the process. So you acknowledged the standards that you all use, but can you just further elaborate on that level of discrepancy, that those anecdotal stories that we're hearing from landlords, and some that say that they're being dinged because they didn't have blinds up, or a countertop was 10 inches too far off. Is that something that's currently happening, or has the policies changed over the years?
So let me say that we strive very hard to make sure that discrepancies don't happen. The inspectors that we use have to go through a housing quality standard training program. They have to be certified as having passed that program. And, the intent behind that program is to instruct as to what the standards are, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, in order to reduce the discrepancies between one inspector and another. Now, are some inspectors going to be stricter than others, and say, if there's like a slight variation that they'll let it pass and others won't? Human beings being such, that probably will happen, but that certainly is something that we would not want to happen. We do have regular weekly meetings with our inspection contractor to make sure that the inspections are proceeding as they need to be, including honoring the time commitments that we are advertising that we want to adhere to make sure that the communication between inspectors and landlords, especially in the initial inspection, is happening properly, and just ensuring that the relationship, the ultimate relationship between CMHA and the landlord goes the way that we want it, because we know that the interaction with the inspection team is going to impact it.
Wonderful. Do you have an idea what the average cost of improvements are for landlords that are failing? And I know that that's probably hard to ballpark, but just I wonder if you have an idea of what that might look like.
So I don't have an average. The variation between one fail and another fail can be extreme. Just piggybacking on something that Scott said earlier, I think that you're going to find that the processes that take more than 60 days, you're going to have a higher cost of compliance, because that is going to indicate that there are physical issues with a particular unit that are difficult to address and more expensive to correct.
Okay. And, I think it's helpful to acknowledge that the city of Columbus has a housing code, which does prescribe housing standards that all units are supposed to adhere to. And so, gentlemen, do you find that the standards that CMHA uses, I believe it's the HCQ standards, are they far off from what the city of Columbus currently has on the book?
They're not far off. In general, the issue is that these are coming from the federal government. And, there's how many jurisdictions across the United States of America. So rather than trying to have a program that allows local housing authorities to adhere to local housing standards, they impose the federal standard. They tend to be consistent. A lot of jurisdictions use a uniform kind of a code that the HQS model is based on. But, there are definitely differences. And, as I said, HUD regulations prohibit the housing authority from, paying subsidy on a unit that does not meet the housing quality standards.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, I truly do appreciate the presentation and information this evening. I look forward to continuing to have ongoing conversations as we work through specifically the source of income discrimination legislation.
Thank you.
And thank you. And with that, we will move on to the public testimony portion of our program. Once again, for those who are going to be providing testimony this evening, you do have 3 minutes. There will be a buzzer that will go off at the end of your 3 minutes. Please state your name and who you represent. Our first testimony will come from, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Ms. Anna Maria Perales Lang with Bell Harbor Management of Ohio. Welcome to Council, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. I'm a little bit nervous. All right. So I'm Ana Maria Perales Lang with Bell Harbor Management of Ohio, and I am very active in the community. And, you know, I talked the last time. I went over everything that you are trying to propose. And while I think you have great, the one with not discriminating for what people's resource incomes are coming from, we already been practicing that for years. So that's, I think, a very good idea. It keeps from discrimination and all that. What I do have two things. The one about receipts. You all are saying basically that you give people 72 hours to give people receipts. Well, most of my residents, or many of my residents, pay through the slot, and which means that they just put it through the door. And if it falls on a holiday, for example, if people were paying on Friday, we were closed on Monday, the holiday, so it would actually be 4 days. So I think it's what you're trying to do is a great idea, but I think you really need to extend the days a little bit, because for holidays and things like that, people put things through the slot at night, and sometimes if there's like bad weather or whatever, and you're not sending people over there. So that was the only thing that I had with that one. And then the one was the security deposits. So big one is the security deposit has to stay in a separate account from the operating account. And one of the things I read here was it said that the person could pay one check for both the security and the rent when they're paying their payment or whatever. And that is not allowed. We have to keep them separate. And so that's a kind of a question that I'm wondering who drew this up, and they might want to look into that, because we're not allowed to keep them together, because the deposit always stays in escrow. It stays separate in its own account, and it stays there until the resident leaves. So on that note, also, I'm still not a fan of the security deposit thing that you got going on, that where you actually people can pay, I guess kind of pay for 6 months or whatever, because what happens if a resident skips? What happens if a resident doesn't pay the whole amount and then do a lot of damage? It seems like a great idea from the resident point of view, but seems to be very hurtful from the landlord point of view. We try to keep our deposits lower and to be fair, and so that we can give them back. But bottom line is, you can't expect us to take a hit on damages and breaking of leases and then have to find out how to get that money back. There's nothing where they're doing that. And again, the organizations that have presented have not been around for a long time enough to really give you kind of an idea of what would happen and what issues they have. So on that one, I really think you all really need to take a moment and look into it really well, because I think that it gives a good idea. There's still a lot of iffies about it, and there's still not a lot of answers. So that's all I really have to say. I think what you're trying to do is a really good thing, but I please remember that the landlords are not the bad guys. That's it.
Thank you so much for your testimony this evening. And I absolutely agree with you. Landlords are not the bad guys. We appreciate our landlords. We cannot do this work of addressing our affordable and eviction crisis without the partnership of you all. So I appreciate your remarks this evening, specifically as it relates to the rental receipt legislation. I acknowledge the notion that if the third day falls on a holiday, do we need to clarify that it's 3 business days exempting a holiday? I think that if it's not already included, or it hasn't been included in the updates that have been made over the past 24 hours, I don't see that as something that's unreasonable at all. And as I've stated throughout the hearing tonight, we are making ongoing edits to the legislation as we receive them. Please note that we are not being haphazard in any shape or form in the way that we have researched these companies that are currently on the market, and specifically the 2 that have presented before this legislative body. Councilmember Remy, do you have a question?
Well, you took the suggestion right out of my mind about the business days. I think that could help solve that problem. And I did want to note that we did receive some public testimony where somebody suggested that it included a wide variety of things that it would not be necessary. For instance, somebody writing a check where they have electronic presentation that it had been received. It would only include those things such as cash, particularly cash, I believe, cashier's checks and money orders. Are those the three basic areas? Yeah. So I think the business days would solve, a holiday like Martin Luther King, for instance, or any other holiday that happens to fall on a Monday after that time period. I'll leave it at that for right this second. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy, and thank you, Ms. Anna Maria. Up next, we have Brian Nope with New City Homes. Brian, welcome to council. The floor is yours. Do we have Mr. Nope available?
Just one moment, Councilmember.
Can you hear me?
We can. The floor is yours.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, Councilmember Favor and Council, for today's opportunity to provide testimony. With the limited time, I'll jump right in. I own and manage rental properties for the last 15 years. My business is located in Columbus. I believe the intent of this legislation is positive and most of the included content is productive. However, I've identified a few key items that will lead to a decrease in the quality and quantity of rental housing in our city, as well as an increase in evictions. First, the inclusion of rent vouchers and the definition of source of income. For several decades, I've found subsidy programs to be beneficial to residents and property owners. Subsidy programs that provide security deposits or one-time catch-up payments are very helpful in keeping residents in their home. Rent voucher programs such as Section 8 are different in that they require property owners to navigate an inflexible process and inflexible lease terms. I try to accept the voucher program whenever possible. However, it is not a good fit for all property owner situations, and acceptance of the voucher program should not be required for the following reasons. The approved rent amount for a Section 8 application is based on statistical rental averages and does not take into account the specific property's quality of finishes or detailed amenities. The CMHA inspection process sets a bare minimum property standard, and the approved rent is often below market for nicely maintained or improved properties. If the legislation were passed as proposed, the owner of a nicely updated property would be required to accept lower rent from Section 8 than they would otherwise receive on the open market. It would also discourage other property owners from making ongoing improvements to their property over and above the Section 8 inspection checklist. Another example of why voucher programs are not always a fit is the lease timeline. Some property owners prefer month-to-month leases. Some even prefer 18 or 24-month leases because annual turnover is very costly. Section 8 requires a monthly lease with no flexibility. My last point on Section 8 is the approval process can be timely and costly to property owners. Maybe unbeknownst to the gentleman who spoke on behalf of CMHA, I highly doubt the percentage that falls within the 30-day, and I base that off my own experiences. I recently completed the process with a Section 8 tenant. The tenant went above and beyond with their communication and effort to fast track the process with CMHA. The property also passed inspection the first time without issue. That said, from application approval to formal acknowledgement from CMHA, it took 62 days before the tenant was allowed to move in. Many property owners rent their property to simply cover their costs or break even, so leaving a property vacant for two full months can be a money-losing endeavor. Lastly, I'd like to briefly touch on the proposed renter's choice rental deposit requirements. Specifically, the current proposal calls for requiring a property owner to accept a deposit payment plan of 6 months, possibly longer. This requirement would most certainly bring unnecessary hardship to the property owner. Even with a full deposit, some residents stop paying rent or otherwise violate the rules of the lease within the first 6 months. Absent a full deposit upon move-in, the tenant has little or no skin in the game and is less incentivized to follow through on the terms of the lease. Also, without a full deposit, the property owner will incur greater loss from unpaid rent and damages to property when a tenant moves out. Larger losses from turnover will ultimately result in higher rents being charged citywide. Lastly, when a tenant utilizes security deposit insurance companies like Rhino or Obligo, who we heard today, they pay an administrative fee or premium charge. This cost is not refundable as an added expense to the tenant. Even if they leave the property in perfect condition, they are out the cost of premiums as opposed to a full refund of their deposit. Thank you very much for allowing me the time to share my concerns today. While the proposed legislation aims to accomplish positive things within our city's rental housing industry, I hope my testimony has brought to light some undesirable consequences that will result from a couple key items that are currently included in the proposed legislation. My intent is not to be critical, but instead to offer this feedback in hopes that the proposed legislation can be modified to accomplish what it actually intends to accomplish. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony this evening. Let me allow either one of the Scotts to an opportunity to respond to some of the issues that you highlighted. And then Shira, if you have a response to the testimony that was provided.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I might need help on the third item. The first one regarding accepting rent lower than what they could get on the market. I was unaware that that was part of the legislation. And if you're in a high rent area and you command a rent higher than what CMHA can pay, you're not permitted to go into a contract with us, so you wouldn't be able to rent to our tenant. So that would be between the landlord and the new legislation. And the item on the lease terms, HUD requires CMHA to establish a new contract on a 12-month lease, not a monthly lease. So you have to do a 12-month lease on your initial term. And then I believe after your initial 12-month lease, it's between the tenant and the landlord. And if you want to renew your tenant, the tenant would just work a new lease with you, provide that lease documentation to CMHA. And I believe that we would be able to approve anything as long as it wasn't a very extended term. And regarding the long time for the inspection process, I obviously cannot speak to the unit, but if they wanted to provide detail to us, we could certainly research why an initial inspection that passed on the first inspection took 62 days, and I assure that's not how it should be.
And if I may refer to the deposit alternative section. So while it is true that you pay for the service, non-refundable fees, I think the secret here is the percentage of the deposit you take. If it is a very small percentage, it might make sense to a lot of people to do it, because a lot of times you pay a higher percentage on student debt, for instance, that you could offset with the liquidity that you save. And this is just one example. And now, if we take it into reality, we give our renters a choice. We allow them to choose whether to qualify and use the pre-authorization service or to pay a regular cash deposit through our platform as well. And we provide that for free. So we see across the board that over 70% of the renters choose the pre-authorization option. And the landlords, they like it because they don't need to open specific bank accounts, and they don't need to write checks at the end of the lease. It's all happening on the platform.
Councilmember Remy?
No, I'm good, but I did think of another point that I was going to bring up to Anna Maria's comments, and that was just that I can't speak about yours, Shira, but you do obviously follow Truth in Lending and Fair Credit Act, but the other Rhino, for instance, is also regulated by the Insurance Commission in the state of Ohio. So that gives me a little bit more confidence because you have to have reserves and certainly the right type of assets to be able to operate within the city. Within the state of Ohio. So thanks.
So,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So, Councilmember Remy, that's a fair point. We are also regulated by credit regulation that makes us keep on a side a certain percentage of the credit line that we extend. So we're not just working in you know, we do have regulation that keeps us very honest, and we follow it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just, you know, a brief acknowledgement for my, as it relates to source of income, I think it's important to continue to underscore that we're not attempting to force landlords into situations with individuals. What we're saying is that you can no longer use that as one of the ways to prevent individuals from.
Excuse me, Councilmember Favor, I apologize. Mr. Nope, could you mute yourself, please? Unfortunately, I'm not able to do so. So if you aren't able to do so, I'll have to expel from the, unfortunately, from the meeting because we're getting background noise.
Sorry about that. Yeah, my mute button is not highlighted, but I will turn off my mic separately.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Angie. As I was saying, we're not attempting to force landlords into relationships with tenants. What we're just saying is that you can no longer use a source of income as one of those ways in which someone would not be eligible for the property. It just becomes one of the additional enumerated provisions within the Fair Housing statute. And, you know, the thing is that the federal government is also considering a source of income as another form of fair housing, adding to the Fair Housing federal statute. So this is a conversation that is happening beyond the city of Columbus. So I think that we might be a little bit ahead of the curve, but definitely this is a conversation that we have to have in our community as we continue to work through our issues around affordable housing and our eviction crisis. And then as it relates to the renter's choice legislation, that is also not a mandate. The idea is to just provide a choice for folks who may need it at a certain point in time. If someone wants to elect to pay their security deposit in traditional forms, they still have the ability to be able to do that. And then once again, these products are already on the market and can be used at will. So whether or not we decide to actually pass that legislation, if a landlord and a tenant want to utilize either one of those financial products, they can do so right now. Thank you so much for your testimony tonight, Mr. Nope. Up next, we have Mitch Deminsky with Solutions for Real Estate. Welcome to Council, Mitch, and you have 3 minutes.
Cool. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. Thank you. I'm back. Thank you again for allowing me to speak. Mr. Nope is bringing up some great points, so he stole a little bit of my thunder, which he can have. That's fine. Just so you know, Shayla, I tell my owners, I represent, by the way, we manage 500 units. I represent about 150 different owners. I have a conversation with them when they want to consider Section 8 on what to expect. Not only delays, but also $1,000 for unexpected repairs. To answer your question, I just tell them to manage it. But as a property manager, I'm expected to set the expectations on what might happen. I'm also part of the eviction. I attend the eviction roundtable that occurred last week, and there's a lot of programs that are coming out to help tenants, which is awesome. But I'm most familiar with Section 8 and how they work, and I too want to challenge. I think Emmanuel did a great job of challenging CMHA on just shoring up their processes, because we are experiencing delays on that side. I'll give you one example. We have 4 properties right now that we're trying to track the money down and get everything going on. This property I personally own. The tenant got approved at the end of September. The lease, or I should say it was approved through inspection about 4 weeks later, and the lease started on 11/1 when the tenant moved in. We just went into the HAP contract today, and if you're doing the math at home, we have not gotten any money for this property yet. We are in 4 to 5 months of this property not incurring any income, but obviously we're incurring the expense on that side. So there's a huge delay. That's real money, and that's a conversation I have to have with my owners that they have to prepare for. And with the moratoriums that are going on with CDC and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, combined with this, it gets very difficult. So I challenge CMHA to shore up. I don't know why it takes so long to get money, but we have to chase CMHA money just like we chase other tenants' money. We're with weekly calls and waiting for emails and all that stuff. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony this evening. Scott, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that, Mitch. And obviously, I can't speak of that exact tenant's experience or your experience with that tenant. I'm assuming that the resident, that CMHA is paying back rent from the date the tenant moved in. And if there was a delay in the actual HAP contract being sent out to you, we could investigate and find out why and try and make sure that doesn't happen going forward. You know, when the HAP contract gets sent out, it does need to be signed by the landlord and then returned back to our office, and then we start to process it. So there is processing time, but in our traditional perfect world of unit passing inspection, it should be faster than that. So Mitch, if you want to reach out to our landlord liaison or myself personally, we could research that individual tenant and kind of find out what happened and make sure you're being paid back to the date they moved in, and also identify anything that may have happened to cause that delay. But without the specifics right here, I really can't address the details. But I will commit to looking at the process.
Scott, what would it look like to ensure that there was a process that was streamlined for landlords that are in having issues like the one that was just highlighted? I know that you just acknowledged a landlord line, but I imagine that truly does get flooded, and you know, we want to be in partnership with the landlords as it relates to this specific legislation. And so anything that we can do to kind of help streamline that process and troubleshoot those issues before they, you know, exceed that 30-day period would really be.
That's a very good point, Councilmember. And CMHA has been trying to move to all like electronic contract signing, so nobody has to come into the office, and you can do everything just via email through DocuSign or whatever system that we're currently using. So we're hoping that speeds things up. And once a unit passes inspection, it's going to come back to our office, and there is processing time. So there's a couple of days to get it back from the contractor, get it processed in the system. But from the time that it's processed to sending out an email and then getting that signed contract back should not take 60 days. And I agree with you on that. I don't know why it is in this time. Sometimes it is delayed coming back to us signed, which can cause a delay. But if there is a delay in us sending it out, that's on us, and that can absolutely be addressed. And then once it comes back to us, there's going to be another processing time, and theoretically, it should be kicked into the next check run that the Housing Authority does. Now, depending on how quickly we get everything back, it will determine what check run that goes into.
Got it. Councilmember Remy?
Yeah, Scott, would you be willing to enter into, I mean, obviously there's always one-offs, but we should always be striving for best practices. Would you be willing to enter into, you know, an agreement and cooperation with us passing this legislation, if we were to do so, that you would agree to best practices, you know, a quality standards guarantee, you know, if this occurs, so just to make sure that we're constantly striving to avoid scenarios like were just brought to our attention, I've heard this anecdotally over and over again, and it's very concerning to me, obviously. And so I want to make sure that we're partnering in a way that you're bettering yourselves, we're bettering ourselves as a community, and we're making sure that instances like this doesn't happen again. So if somebody passes an inspection at 30 days, they've been sent the contract, they're guaranteed to be paid from the date of move in. There's no questions asked. That's not a debatable piece. And then the quality standard would be that they're guaranteed to be paid within X days, so that 60, 90, 100 days doesn't happen.
Yeah, we would be happy to sit down and talk about that and kind of formalize something. So we realize the importance of getting good landlords in our program, and we want to value them, and we see them as true partners with us. So we would be happy to do that. And, with the way that we're doing business now, you're in a global pandemic, everybody's working from home, things are a little bit different. So there's kind of these little weird quirks that we're still trying to figure out. But we would certainly be willing to look at our processes and determine and come up with best practices, that would be the best that we could probably, do with you guys. So absolutely open to the conversation.
And one more thing, I want to make sure that, when I like the percentage, but that you gave as far as, giving us percentages, but if you could forward to us actual numbers of contracts we're talking about, like when you say 87% that are, inspected within 30 days, I'd like to see the numbers rather than the percentage, the actual numbers. So if you could get that to us, we'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilmember Remy. Up next, we have Rachel Winning. Welcome to Council. You have 3 minutes.
Councilmember Rachel is no longer listed.
Thank you, Ms. Angie. We will note her absence for the record. And last but certainly not least, we have Carly Booth with the Affordable Housing Alliance of Central Ohio. Welcome back to Council, Carly.
Good evening, and thank you, Chair Favor and council members from Hardin. We really appreciate the opportunity to share the Affordable Housing Alliance's feedback and to have a chance to really have kind of a meaningful discussion on how we create a fair housing system in Central Ohio. I do want to recognize that we've been really engaged in this dialogue with your team and with some of our city leaders since these concepts were first proposed last year. And we're very pleased to see that a lot of our feedback has already been incorporated into the updated drafts. That kind of willingness to really invite public comment in and to use that feedback to make our policies strong is fantastic. So as you know, the Alliance is a nonprofit organization that advocates for the tools that we need to reduce Franklin County's 54,000 household affordability gap. We do not represent any industry or stakeholder. Instead, we advocate for housing solutions that benefit our neighbors, our neighborhoods, and our region as a whole. However, we draw a lot of our knowledge and some of our strength from our members. Those members do include folks who own collectively over 10,000 units of rental housing here in Franklin County. So we come from a very strong knowledge bank. With that experience in mind, we want to express our deepest support for the anti-discrimination ordinance. Source of income bias is real. It is a major barrier in our community. Not only does it make it harder for people to find the type of housing that best fits their family's unique needs, but it also results in deeply entrenched racial inequity and economic segregation. In this work, with this ordinance, we are very lucky to walk in the footsteps of 18 other states and 100 other cities who have already instituted these protections, which now cover more than half of all Americans. It is a tried and true response. From them, we know that it works. And we also know that it is workable for the landlords who are entrusted to follow the law. As this ordinance continues to evolve in the coming days, we really look forward to learning more about what the enforcement mechanism is going to be. And we support ongoing adjustments that increase the predictability for both the landlords and the tenants. And we recommend that individuals harmed by discrimination continue to have access to the courts to enforce their rights. The Alliance also supports the rental receipt rule, which is a common sense measure that really just mimics the best practices that are already out there in the business community. We know that about 1/3 of all of Americans are underbanked, and this requirement provides some reasonable safeguards for that population, which unfortunately disproportionately includes young adults, new Americans, and low-income households. We also appreciate modifications in your draft that recognize the unique and extensive oversight mechanism that's already present in permanent supportive housing, and your continued support of work to eliminate homelessness in Columbus. Finally, I want to say that we are thankful for the debate surrounding alternates to a traditional security deposit. Over-reliance on large deposits and inflexible move-in policies makes it harder for at-risk households to access safe, decent housing. This is an important conversation that will hopefully lead to policy innovations and move our community forward. We're really eager to watch how those unfold and to learn more about how we best balance authentic tenant choice and consumer protection with reasonable landlord operational requirements. So again, the Alliance package forward. Right on buzzer.
Thank you so much, Carly. We truly do appreciate your testimony and continued advocacy in the housing space in Columbus. Councilmember Remy, anything for Carly this evening?
No, just thank you for your work and appreciate the testimony.
Wonderful. Well, that concludes our testimony portion of tonight's hearing. Thank you once again to everyone who has joined us to listen, learn, and participate this evening. The author, Richard Rothstein, in his national best-selling book, The Color of Law, states that government has an obligation to remedy structural racism regardless of its decades caused ago. We have created a caste system in this country with African Americans kept exploited and geographically separated by racially explicit government policies. Although most of these policies are now off the books, they have never been remedied and their effects endure. I know that these are complex challenges we are attempting to address. However, this is the necessary work we all must do collectively to move our city forward. The work to dismantle systemic racism and uplift justice in all aspects of our society is not easy, but I truly believe we are moving in the right direction. I appreciate the interest in these topics and the productive partnerships and conversations that are taking place. I understand we still have an opportunity to address other topics in relation to these proposals, including the effective date following passage, community education, and other considerations. I will continue to keep everyone updated on our next steps. It's no secret that our city is facing an affordable housing crisis, right along with an eviction crisis. As chair of housing, I take this role very seriously. It's imperative that we get this legislation right. And so my team and I have been laser focused on addressing every issue that has been brought to our attention and have truly been making an attempt to fully assess any unintended consequences of this legislative package. As we continue to work through the last round of edits, please do not hesitate to reach out to my team with questions or comments. You can reach my team at Tynesha Harden at TYHARDEN at columbus.gov and Anissa Lieben at AALIBAN at columbus.gov. I'd also like to thank our team behind the scenes. And as you all can tell, we had to transition from not being located at City Hall, our tech team being located at City Hall this evening, to truly working all from home, given the fact that City Hall was closed over the weekend and still remains closed. So let me please give a round of applause to CTV, Mark Carter and Angela Burks, and a special thanks to Andrew Dyer for his tireless work and commitment to housing. Thank you all once again for your participation this evening. Happy New Year, and have a wonderful rest of the evening. Take care.